The courtroom was thick with an eerie silence, a tension that gripped every breath, every heartbeat, every blink. It wasn't the kind of silence that follows a dramatic moment. It was suffocating, almost tangible. Today wasn't just another day of witness testimonies, documents, or rumors. Today, the judge was set to make a decision that could shape the future of not just a man, but an empire. Sean Diddy Combs entered the courtroom, his expression as stoic as it had been throughout the trial. But even he couldn't hide his nervous energy anymore. His hands twitched, his eyes flickered. The walls were closing in, and for the first time, they weren't metaphorical, they were real. The judge cleared his throat, papers in hand, and the courtroom leaned in. Victims, supporters, former associates, all held their breath. This court has reviewed the financial reports submitted by federal investigators, as well as the testimonies provided by expert forensic analysts over the past 7 days, the judge began. We have found credible evidence of deliberate financial obfuscation, rapid asset conversion, and trust reallocation, all occurring in direct proximity to the timeline of the civil and criminal complaints filed against the defendant. Diddy's legal team stiffened at the mention of these findings. The judge continued, his voice firm, in light of these findings, the court hereby approves the emergency motion to freeze all domestic and international financial accounts controlled by Mr. Sean Combs, including subsidiary trusts, joint partnerships, shell corporations, and entities held under Combs Enterprises. A gasp swept through the courtroom. It wasn't just shock, it was the sound of a man's empire beginning to crumble. Diddy remained motionless. His lawyers stayed silent, as if the single sentence had stripped away not just his wealth, but the myth of his untouchability. The prosecutor stood, voice low but powerful. Your Honor, we request permission to display a visual breakdown of the assets affected by today's ruling. The judge gave a brief nod, and the lights in the courtroom dimmed. The screen flickered to life, revealing slide after slide of the frozen assets, $712 million in real estate across New York, Miami, and Los Angeles, $86 million in art and collectibles, including unregistered pieces stored in a Manhattan vault, $200 million in offshore holdings spread across 4 Caribbean banks. $47 million in cryptocurrency moved between anonymized wallets in the last 90 days, $168 million across Combs Enterprises linked trusts, PR firms, and personal gifting accounts. The final slide appeared, total frozen assets, $1.243 billion. The words immediate freeze activation blinked on the screen, confirming that access to the accounts had been terminated. The prosecutor stepped forward again. These accounts aren't just numbers on a screen. They were the lifeblood of a network of silence. Every payoff, every NDA, every suppressed voice, every gift sent to keep the truth buried, funded through these accounts. This freeze isn't just about punishment, it's about removing his shield. In the gallery, a visible shift occurred. Victims, some with tears in their eyes, watched as the very system that had once silenced them began to disintegrate, piece by piece. As the courtroom processed this monumental move, the unexpected happened. The bailiff stepped forward, and the atmosphere grew even more tense, signaling that the day's revelations were far from over. The tension in the courtroom deepened as the judge's brow furrowed. He leaned in and whispered something to the bailiff, who nodded and promptly left. Moments later, 2 federal officers entered, carrying a slim, reinforced case. They placed it on the evidence table, one standing beside it while the other opened the latch with a click. Inside was a black digital tablet, frozen on a login screen labeled Vault Ledger Villa Eloa. The screen displayed a timestamp, last accessed 2:14 a.m. April 5th. The prosecutor stepped forward. This is the master digital ledger of Mr. Combs's personal vault, hidden beneath his Los Angeles estate. The log includes timestamped entries of cash withdrawals, luxury asset movements, and controlled document removals. The footage tied to these movements is now under federal protection, but we can confirm for the record that withdrawals were made immediately after subpoenas were issued, often at night and just hours before scheduled raids. Diddy's face remained still, but his eyes flickered. He slowly shook his head and whispered something to his attorney, but it was too late. His billion-dollar empire had just been frozen before him, and with it, the shield that had kept his past from resurfacing. Wealth, which once protected him, was no longer his to control. It now belonged to the court, to the victims, and to the truth. As the courtroom lights flickered back to full brightness, the silence that followed wasn't one of relief. It was a stunned, collective realization that the fortress built around him had finally crumbled. No matter how untouchable Diddy once seemed, his sprawling financial empire was now under the control of federal authorities. But what followed would cut deeper still. The prosecutor stepped forward again, her voice darkening with the weight of what was about to be revealed. "Your Honor," she began, holding up a sleek black folder, "this is the Treasury trace log of transactions made between March 2021 and February 2024, 3 years during which allegations, settlements, and private agreements piled up against Mr. Combs." She paused and continued, "What we discovered within this log wasn't just wealth, it was weaponized silence." The screen behind her lit up once more. The courtroom watched as a digital spreadsheet filled with transaction history scrolled down the screen. The entries blurred together, hundreds, possibly thousands, of flagged payments, most made in round amounts with vague descriptions like consulting, media relations, and reputation alignment. These weren't payments for services, the prosecutor said, her voice sharp. They were bribes disguised as business. She clicked on one entry, and the details appeared: recipient, redacted, amount, $250,000, note, discretion protocol initiation. This payment, she continued, was made 10 hours after the confirmed incident at Diddy's East Hampton property. The victim never went public and vanished from the narrative entirely, but the money speaks. The system speaks. And it says that Combs didn't just pay people to stay quiet, he built an entire economy on it. The prosecutor then clicked to the next slide, revealing over $30 million in payments made to former employees, personal assistants, stylists, event staff, and even bodyguards, all in the weeks following major headlines about Diddy. Each transaction lined up like a domino, triggered not by guilt, but by exposure. Then, without warning, the screen shifted to video footage. The camera angle was from above, showing a luxurious underground vault, the date in the corner reading January 14, 2024. Diddy was seen walking in alone, holding a black duffel bag. He opened a silver cabinet, pulled out a tablet, typed for several seconds, and slid the bag inside the vault. Transaction confirmed, $2.3 million in USD currency. The prosecutor clicked pause. This withdrawal was made less than 48 hours after this court ordered a preliminary asset disclosure. This wasn't preparation, it was evasion. And then came the twist that no one expected. In the same ledger, there was a secondary entry, not as a transaction, but as a message. The prosecutor enlarged it on the screen. The message read, "Message log number 00043, if this ever goes public, bury it under generosity." People forget when they're distracted by a donation. The air in the courtroom shifted. The weight of the message hit everyone like a freight train. The system of silence, control, and manipulation that Diddy had built to protect himself was now being unraveled, piece by piece, in front of the world. The courtroom was suffocating with anticipation. Today was not just another day of witnesses or documents, it was the moment that could define the future of both a man and his empire. Sean Diddy Combs entered with his usual impassive expression, but for the first time, even he couldn't mask his unease. His hands twitched, and his eyes darted. The walls were closing in, and this time, it wasn't just a figure of speech. The judge cleared his throat and made a quiet remark to the bailiff, who soon returned carrying a slim, reinforced case. The officers placed it on the evidence table and opened it, revealing a black tablet with a login screen titled Vault Ledger Villa Eloa. The timestamp read, "Last accessed 2:14 a.m., April 5th. The prosecutor stepped forward and announced, "This is the master digital ledger of Mr. Combs's personal vault, hidden beneath his Los Angeles estate. The log contains timestamped entries of cash withdrawals, luxury asset movements, and controlled document removals. The footage connected to these actions is now under federal protection, but we can confirm that withdrawals occurred right after subpoenas were issued, often at night and just hours before scheduled raids. The air grew heavier. Diddy remained still, but a slow shake of his head and a whispered word to his attorney signaled that he knew the game was up. His billion-dollar empire, built on wealth and control, was now frozen. The shield that had protected him was gone, and it no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the court, to the victims, to the truth. The courtroom lights brightened, but the atmosphere remained heavy. The realization was sinking in. The fortress had crumbled. The empire was now under the control of federal authorities. Yet, the prosecutor wasn't finished. She stepped forward once again, this time with a darker, more deliberate tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is what we mean by empire," she said, her voice slicing through the tension. "Not skyscrapers, not endorsements, not fame, control. Financial control, emotional control, the ability to purchase silence, orchestrate forgetting, and bury the truth behind a charity ribbon." The prosecutor approached the jury box, her words now carefully measured. "You've seen how he paid off victims, but now you see something worse. He planned it. He wrote it down. He left instructions, not to fix what he did, but to bury it before anyone could find it." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. The screen behind her illuminated again, showing the total value of the frozen assets, $1.2 billion. "This is not because money is evil," she continued, "but because this money wasn't just earned, it was engineered. Every dollar a brick in the wall that kept the truth out and the victims locked inside." She paused, allowing the silence to hang in the air. And now, for the first time, that wall is gone. In the gallery, a mother clutched her daughter's hand, a former employee wiped away tears. Diddy sat motionless as his legal team froze, knowing what had just transpired couldn't be undone. The empire, the power, the illusion, everything had started to collapse. The prosecutor turned again, now presenting a new type of evidence, testimony. "Your Honor," she began, "we call a previously anonymous witness, a former financial operations assistant for Combs Enterprises from 2017 through 2023. The witness entered the courtroom, his shoulders squared but his face weary. No one had known his name until this moment. After being sworn in, he took the stand. The prosecutor approached him gently. "How long did you work for Mr. Combs?" 6 years. "And what was your job?" "Processing ledger entries, signing off on internal transfers between shell accounts, coordinating silent payouts." The courtroom tensed as the prosecutor asked, "Can you explain what silent payouts means?" The witness nodded. "It means someone got paid not to talk, usually after something went wrong. Sometimes it was cash, sometimes crypto, sometimes a property deed. Always clean on paper, but we all knew what it was." "Did Mr. Combs authorize these directly?" "Yes. He called them incentives for privacy." A murmur swept through the gallery. The prosecutor then asked, "Do you recognize this document?" She showed him a digital tablet displaying an entry from the inner vault ledger. "Yeah," he said. "That's the inner vault ledger interface. Only 2 people had access, me and him." The prosecutor tapped the screen. December 28, 2022. $3.5 million withdrawn. Memo, complete silence for year-end. The witness hesitated before speaking. "That was the biggest one I ever logged. It wasn't a business expense. It was a payoff. Someone had recordings, security footage. She threatened to go public, and what happened to her?" The witness took a deep breath. "She disappeared. Not violently, just off the grid. No social media, no employment history. It was like she never existed." The room fell into a heavy silence. The prosecutor turned to the jury. This man didn't come forward because of a change of heart. He came forward because he realized what he had helped protect, not just the money, but the darkness funded by it. She looked back at the witness. "Did you ever question what you were doing?" His voice cracked. Every day. But when you're surrounded by that much money, that much power, you convince yourself you're just a small part of it. That it's not your fault. The prosecutor nodded solemnly. Until the moment you realized the entire system was made up of small parts, and every silent transfer, every quiet exit, every erased victim was made possible by people like you. He didn't deny it. He simply said, yes. The prosecutor turned back to the room. Ladies and gentlemen, the billions weren't the beginning of Diddy's empire. They were the end product. Every asset, every company, every beachfront home, every endorsement, funded not by talent alone, but by control. Financial control. Emotional control. Legal control. She held up a final document. This is an internal email from 2020, written by Mr. Combs to his senior advisors. It reads, "If they want to bring me down, they'll have to take everything I own because that's what protects me." There was no cheer in the courtroom. No applause. This wasn't a victory. It was a funeral, the quiet death of a legacy built on glamour, music, and prestige, now reduced to frozen assets and confessions from the inside. The prosecutor closed with a final statement. The world saw a mogul, but we now see what he really built, a silent empire. And today, that silence has finally been stripped of its power. Diddy sat still, his eyes empty, as he realized that what had been taken from him wasn't just money, it was the illusion that wealth could save him. When the judge returned from recess, the weight in the room felt heavier. Diddy no longer looked like a mogul. The suit still draped his frame, the chain still gleamed faintly, but something had drained from his eyes. He wasn't a billionaire anymore. He was just a man watching his empire fall apart, piece by piece. The prosecutor stood once more, this time without a file or tablet. "Your Honor," she began, "the financial collapse of Sean Combs isn't just a result of mismanagement or aggressive prosecution. What we are witnessing is the deliberate unraveling of a system that was built to remain invisible. But the most telling evidence isn't what we froze, it's what we found inside the freeze." She turned to the jury. "Today, we present the internal memo that was never meant to see the light of day." The clerk handed the judge a document, which appeared on the screen. It was a strategy memo from Combs Enterprises dated April 2022. The subject line read, Phase 4 Strategy, Noise Control. The objective, restructure primary accounts under charitable arms. Instruction number 3, shift all active payouts to discretionary funds. The room held its breath as the enormity of the revelation sank in. The courtroom witnessed a dramatic unraveling of Sean Diddy Combs' empire as a detailed series of financial schemes, manipulations, and covert operations were exposed. The prosecution revealed a series of documents and testimonies that showed how Diddy used his wealth, influence, and charitable organizations to conceal illicit activities, silence victims, and manipulate public perception. This included using shell companies, fake charities, and offshore accounts to hide his actions, as well as paying victims to disappear and shielding himself through media distractions. Key pieces of evidence included internal memos that detailed preemptive strategies for handling exposure, including the use of charitable donations to deflect negative publicity. A former financial operations assistant testified about handling silent payouts to keep people quiet after incidents, including one involving a victim who vanished after threatening to go public. Further evidence exposed how Diddy laundered money through real estate and nonprofits, creating an illusion of philanthropy while using it to shield his predatory behavior. As the case unfolded, it became clear that Diddy's empire was built not on talent but on control, fear, and deception. The final blow came when the court declared that all of Diddy's frozen assets, totaling $1.24 billion, would be permanently seized. His misuse of nonprofit organizations was also recognized, and these operations would be dissolved and investigated. The truth, long hidden behind a veil of fame and wealth, was finally exposed, shattering Diddy's carefully crafted image. The trial wasn't just about financial misconduct, it revealed a deeply ingrained system of manipulation and control, and in the end, it was not just the empire that crumbled, but the false narrative that Diddy had created around it.